Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Good morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt with the Hillsdale Dialogue, the last radio hour of the week. And this morning, after the smoking ruin of Joe Biden's debate performance last night cools a bit, and we're a little bit more objective, we go to the nonpartisan head of the Kirby Center, the dean of the Van Andel Graduate School of Government, Professor and Dean Matt Spalding. Dean Spalding, we know that Hillsdale College, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu, is nonpartisan. So I'm looking for an objective assessment. You and I have watched a lot of debates. What did you think about last night?
Well, I've got to say, Hugh, I have watched a lot of debates. And I remember when Ronald Reagan's age was a question and he daftly put it aside with his joke about his opponent's youth and inexperience. We're not in that moment anymore. I think all of us, many Americans, have loved ones which we've seen decline. We have seen it occur over time. Or if we go visit an elderly friend, we've not seen it and we see it suddenly, it's very jarring. It's very emotionally hard for us to see. From the moment President Biden walked on the stage, which was kind of slow and jerky and seemed to be a little disconcerted, I thought he was going to warm up. I wanted to give him a benefit of the doubt. Perhaps he did have a little bit of a cold as it came out, or it was said halfway through. But over the course of the debate, because of virtually nothing he said, in many ways, Biden was more aggressive. His comments were more biting than President Trump's. Trump was quite moderate in his tone, and he kept himself in check. So that was not the issue. Nothing was said here, I think. There were some great lines, some great moments, some great back and forth on some issues which were quite, in some cases, very substantive. But the decline that became evident over the course of the debate, I've never seen anything like that in my life. And so if lots of Americans tuned in who have not been tracking this and thinking, oh, this is just the opposition party complaining about fighting a partisan debate and they're going after his age for no good reason, I think that goes out of the ballpark completely. That's not an issue. They have been struck by this. It's completely self-evident, and they have to deal with it. Which is why I think in the media seems, and even afterwards, I watched the network responses immediately, ABC and CBS, NBC. They started treating it like a normal debate. There was some back and forth, some interesting commentaries made, but then they started getting reports in from other sources about the Democratic Party thinkers and observers who were worried, and then a sense of panic. What do we do about this? And then it became clear. The other thing I thought was very telling is the spin room was immediately filled with Trump spokesmen who were doing the normal debate responses, very happy with their candidates' performance. But the Biden team did not show up for some period of time. And when they did, they were all kind of really confronted. Almost, they were kind of cornered at one point with these questions about his performance and ability to hold the office, which raises extremely serious concerns. Not only is this a question about a nomination, we're in the midst of a campaign, but that the man is currently president of the United States and will be for the remainder of his term. This is a serious, serious problem, not just for the Democratic Party right now, but for the country.
Well, there is we're old enough, Dean Spalding, to remember when the Soviets used the phrase correlation of forces to decide whether or not it was advantageous to go into Hungary in 1956 or to put down the Prague Spring in 1968 or invade Afghanistan in the last year of Jimmy Carter's presidency. We know what correlation of forces mean. There isn't a bad person in the world right now who thinks Joe Biden is capable of stopping them. And that's very dangerous. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. And I think former President Trump's best moments, which I didn't actually, I generally expected this, but his turn, I think, was very good and worked very well, but had this effect given Biden's performance, which focused exactly on the point you're making, which he just pointed out the weaknesses thus far in the Biden administration, especially when it came to Afghanistan and the Russians going into Ukraine. It was because of the weaknesses of the administration that they acted. And then he pointed out, and everyone knows that, he said several times, you know that, and I know that. And if you're thinking about it and you're watching it and you're hearing that argument, but then you're seeing it before your very eyes of the weakness of this individual, and America's enemies, America's critics, America's skeptics are watching this debate and seeing the man who's currently president of the United States. And of course they're calculating about that, and not just what it means in January of next year, what it means right now, what it means
right now
and January.
Let me play for you in the first segment, Dean Spalding, the worst moment last night, because it's a lie by Joe Biden about who died and who didn't die during his presidency. Can we play that, please, Harley? The worst moment.
The idea that he did something that was significant. And the military, when he was president, they were still killing people in Afghanistan. He didn't do anything about that. When he was president, we still found ourselves in a position where you had a notion that we were this safe country. The truth is, I'm the only president this century that doesn't have this decade, that doesn't have any troops dying anywhere in the world like he did.
All right, Matt, Dean Spalding, I should say. It's a lie. I don't know that he remembers Abbey Gate and the 13 Americans who died there on his watch because of his improvident decisions, but it's a lie. No one called him out on it. The president, even the former president, was even gracious because it's a clear memory lapse, right?
Well, it is, but, I was struck by he was called out on that, not directly as it being a lie, as much as the response. Several times, President Trump came back to the departure from Afghanistan and the debacle, and he did mention the people that died there. So it wasn't called out as directly, but I think the powerful response again and again, pointing that out, had that effect. I was actually struck by, if you're an average American voter who's not followed these and tracked it as closely as you and I have, his answers are hard to follow. It's not always clear what he's talking about and what his references are. That's part of the cognitive decline. I mean, it was muddled. And I think if you're seeing that and you don't know the particulars of the history and what he's referring to, you've got to be extremely concerned. And then on the flip side, President Trump pointed out the departure from Afghanistan, what's going on. The war in Ukraine would have never happened under my watch, only under your watch. That was, I think, a powerful retort, perhaps indirect, perhaps not as he didn't call it out directly as we might have preferred, but it had that effect, I think.
Dean, ours is a military family. My son-in-law, and nephew on active duty. And I think every military family, I'm a civilian, but I think every military family is worried that he's commander-in-chief this morning. We got a minute to the break. Do you think that concern is widely spread among active duty military and family?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a concern about among not just active duty and military, but every American who's concerned about national security. I mean, we are going into very trepidatious times. There are trying things occurring all over the world, the Middle East, Asia, Ukraine, and this has now been revealed. I want to just stress again the sense, if you've not been tracking this closely, the curtain has been pulled back, and you're seeing the wizard for the first time, and he's this very old man who doesn't, who can't seem to hold it together. And he was once thought to be the most powerful man in the world, and this is what has been revealed to you. This is what I think is causing the crisis. This is a terrible, terrible situation to wake up to if you're an American.
And when you remember at the State of the Union, now they said, "Oh, he did fine." Well, then he's declined precipitously in 6 months. Imagine 6 months from now. I am very worried. We're going to talk with Dean Spalding about Federalist 78 and all things Hillsdale are at hillsdale.edu. Go sign up for the free speech digest in Primus and every Hillsdale dialogue ever, and there are hundreds of them, at HughForHillsdale.com, HughForHillsdale.com. Stay tuned.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now. Or text the word Imprimis to 71844 and we'll send you a link to sign up for your free lifetime subscription. That's IMPRIMIS to 71844.
Welcome back, America. In the next segment, when it's longer, I'm going to talk with Dean Matt Spalding, my guest on this, the Hillsdale Dialogue, about Federalist 78 and energy in the executive, because he knows this stuff cold. But I want to tell everyone, if you're new to the show, we've got a new audience, Matt, this week in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, on the banks of the Mississippi River. And to the voice of North Alabama, welcome. It's 96.7, 1590 down there in Muscle Shoals. Welcome. So we got to reintroduce everyone every week. I do this with Dr. Arnn, who's the president of Hillsdale College, Dean Spalding, who's the dean of the graduate school. I do it with another member of faculty. We go high and we go back so that all of the Hillsdale Dialogues are collected at HughForHillsdale.com. New audience members, it's the best podcast in the world. Go and get it. It's hours and hours of it. But Dean is nonpartisan, and Imprimis is nonpartisan, and so I don't put you in a partisan position. I thought that Jake Tapper and Dana Bash did a fine and fair job last night. I had told everyone coming up to it that they would. Their question set was left. I mean, too much abortion, too much child care, no Iran, no China, but it was fair. Do you agree or disagree?
No, I actually think I do agree. As a matter of fact, it became clear as the night went along that partway into it, I realized all of a sudden they actually were doing a fine job. They were clear. They asked questions. They allowed follow-ups, I thought, when they were appropriate. I don't think there were any clear instances of preventing an answer when an answer was obviously needed. It was more to the left. I would agree with that. But in terms of the concerns going into the debate, I mean, I was, for one, very concerned about how these rules would change the debate, what it would mean, how it would be conducted. A cynical person might think that the setup really was being imposed from the Biden campaign on the Trump campaign to his disadvantage. But I thought the rules actually worked to former President Trump's advantage in many ways. But the actual questioning, the CNN performance, I thought was very good. And having been concerned about this being sponsored and controlled by one particular network, and there are some questions actually about that network letting in White House correspondents to the studio, which I was really worried about going into the debate. But having said that, their performance, I think, given all the criticisms going into it, their performance was, I thought, very, very good. So I agree with you.
So I want to ask you about this, Dean Spalding. If you live in a blue bubble and you absorb only blue bubble news, you're going to be stunned this morning. And there was a lot of just stunned commentary and analysts. So I played NBC, ABC, CBS this morning. I played MSNBC and CNN. I played all the left. They're all stunned. They're like Caesar's friends on the way to the forum. They just knifed and knifed and knifed Biden last night. Are you surprised? There's like 1 out of 20 commentators are center right, much less hardcore conservatives like most people would like to see in a fair panel. Are you surprised they have turned en masse on Biden this way?
Well, I am, but I think what will be interesting is what happens over the next days. I mean, an immediate reaction against him, I think, is the natural surprise of what happened. I think anybody who watched that debate would be struck by his performance, and it was not. It was all of his own making and his own abilities were kind of revealed. So the immediate reaction, as I mentioned earlier, it was they tried not to discuss it, and then it became obvious. Kind of blows up, and I think now it's all out in the open, and there's a sense of panic. The question will be what we see in the immediate days ahead, because as you also know from history, sometimes the king's clothing is revealed, but then they go into another mode, which is to ignore it. And the question is if they got to a point where they need to ignore it for the sake of trying to run a campaign here. And I think that the point at which we are, I mean, we're past the primaries. The delegates have been chosen. They're in a real pickle, which also goes to their concern. But I think that we'll start seeing a reaction against the panic.
That's interesting, Dean. They are in a pickle, but the country's in danger. When we come back, the 25th Amendment, after we talk about Federalist 78, we have a unitary executive for a reason. Dean Spalding is a constitutional scholar. I teach con law. We have a 25th Amendment for a reason, and we have Federalist 78 to guide us on why we are so disturbed by what we saw in Joe Biden last night. That's more coming up on the Hillsdale Dialogues. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means it's the last radio hour of the week. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. As you can see, I'm in the ReliefFactor.com studio. Dean Spalding, if you're watching on the Salem News Channel, you can tell he's at home. We both make our primary residence in the Beltway, and I don't think you're up in Michigan, Matt. And so I asked you.
I'm actually on campus.
Yeah. Oh, good. So you are in Michigan. Thank you for joining us.
All things on a beautiful Michigan.
There are no such things as beautiful Michigan mornings, but nevertheless, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Everyone can go there and get all of the free video courses. You can get Imprimis for free. If you want to listen, I think we've got 830 now Hillsdale Dialogues with Dr. Arnn and Matt Spalding and other faculty members. They're all collected at hughforhillsdale.com. Dean Spalding, you know the Constitution well. Let's talk about what Hamilton said was the necessary part of the presidency, and then let's talk about the 25th Amendment. Let's start with Federalist 78. What did Hamilton say that we need to have in a president?
Well, so Hugh, you said 78, which is about the judiciary. I mean, I assume you mean.
No, I'm sorry.
About
energy in the executive. Is it 71?
So, a rare occasion. So the one of the unique aspects of the American constitutional system, which is different than previous systems, and a new thing in the American constitutional order that was created, was a clear division between the legislative power and the creation of the modern presidency, which was given the executive power. Remember, before, the king had all this power; he could do whatever he wanted, and there's this slow shift over time to parliament. This is all constitutionalized in the American Constitution. But the key thing there is the American presidency, which did the office of the presidency did two key things. One is it created a constitutional officer to check the legislature and participate in legislation through the veto power and create that check against another branch. But the other thing that it did, it republicanized, it constitutionalized this power, which was previously uncontrolled in the king, into a constitutional system. But that means that even with checks and other things, the American executive has extensive powers unified in one person to make decisions, especially those that deal with war and peace and diplomacy and foreign affairs. That is a necessity of any functioning sovereign government. And in our system, that falls on the shoulders of one person who makes those decisions. So the key to the American presidency is it's unitary, and it has the powers unified under one decision maker, especially in these particular areas of decision making. And the key there is energy, said Hamilton.
It's Federalist number 70, so people can get this. I'm like Napoleon, who said, I am mistaken so often I no longer blush. So I don't blush, but I want people to read the right Federalist paper. It's number 70, not 78. Matt Spalding, of course, is right. 78 is about the judiciary. 70 is about 70 is Hamilton writing about this. Continue, please, Dean Spalding.
So 70 introduces a series of papers about the presidency. It has various particular things about the president, but the key overarching theme is this concept of energy, which is talked about a lot in the Federalist Papers. Government in general must be energetic in order to defend the nation and act and do things. But the particular energy which we think of associated with sovereign governments is in the presidency. And it has to be there. And it has to be there in order to be constitutionalized, but also there to act in particular cases, especially in foreign affairs. That is central and key. But that means this argument about the unitary executive is a very practical one. What the Constitution does is creates branches of government, each with a particular function and a duty. The legislative branch makes laws and has the authority and the duty to oversee lawmaking. It's also the first branch. The third branch, which is a check on both of the other two, which is in Federal 78, is an independent judiciary to make sure that we stay within the bounds of the Constitution. But the key one here for this conversation, in many ways, to make this system work, because you can't have it overly dominated by the legislative power, is the modern American presidency. And there, it combines this constitutional check and balance activity, but also the activity of foreign affairs and war and the necessary components of acting in a nation state. It combines the two of those things in this power of the presidency, but it must be unitary in order to work, which means you have to have separated powers. But in the case of the executive, it has to be unitary in this one person, which gives them a lot of authority. We complain a lot, I think rightly so, about many more things falling under the executive in the modern bureaucratic administrative state. I don't like that. But the necessity we're talking about here, the constitutional, absolute, clear necessity, is that the modern American president, in his hands at any moment, has the ability to make decisions and must make decisions within moments when necessary that have the effect of war and peace and sending Americans to their deaths and making quick decisions which we cannot turn over to the legislative branch, and we cannot wait for a court decision.
I am hoping, Matt, I'm hoping that today the Supreme Court hands down Loper-Bright and strikes the administrative state a death blow in terms of the deference we're supposed to show them under the Chevron doctrine. Yesterday, the Supreme Court struck at the SEC, trying people without a jury, and that's a good thing. But Loper-Bright is coming up, and that is, to me, the most important decision of this term, because it's going to check the federal administrative. Some people are waiting for Trump versus the United States and presidential immunity and the question of whether or not all these January 6th defendants ought to have been tried under this far-reaching, very amorphous statute. That's all important, but the most important thing, get the administrative state put under check, and we started that yesterday. Let me go to the 25th Amendment, though. This is not about the framers. It's a very unwieldy process for removing a president who doesn't want to be removed. Should they be talking about that today? Because genuinely, I'm very worried about this man being the president. He's clearly not being the president. It's Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and Joe Biden, I think.
No. Look, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the 25th Amendment, this is a particularly apt time to be talking about it. This is exactly what it's designed for. The question of the president's competency, it came up briefly at the Constitutional Convention. This was not something they were oblivious of, but the general assumption they made at the time was presidents would serve. Washington, the first one, only served 2 terms, which was actually unexpected by some, and set that precedent. This became an issue, especially again with Franklin Roosevelt, who served several terms beyond that and died in office, actually at a point when he was, I think, himself actually incapable of conducting that office. We should have had the 25th Amendment then. But this is precisely the circumstance in which the 25th Amendment should be discussed. Now, having said that, the 25th Amendment makes a complication for the situation. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, which deals with this, requires the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to essentially, for all intents and purposes, have an in-house coup to send to the Senate and tell them the president is incapable of conducting the office. It's been invoked when presidents have had surgeries temporarily, but this would be a situation in which they're potentially doing that against the opinions of the president. And even if that happens, which would be extremely difficult, even right now, I think, unless there's this overwhelming consensus about what's going on here, for it to be further carried out, it would have to be a vote of the Congress. And I believe it's a 2/3 vote for them to actually then install. The vice president would become a temporary, kind of an acting president immediately, but to make it a solidified situation for the vice president to be acting president, it'd have to be a vote of Congress. So even there, the 25th Amendment is not an easy process. But I believe this is exactly the time in which it should be discussed seriously by both political parties. This is a responsibility of the vice president and the cabinet. The vice president, we a lot of times say, does not have many responsibilities. But one of their responsibilities, given the addition of the 25th Amendment, is to keep an eye on the president and their ability to conduct the office. And if the vice president does not think they are capable, they have an obligation to go to the cabinet, and the cabinet has an obligation then to go to the Congress under the 25th Amendment.
And Dean Spalding, we're going to come back to this and talk about poor Joe Biden, because it really is sad. But I do think they have a responsibility. The Constitution there was a lot of silly talk about Trump and the 25th Amendment. This is not silly. After last night, this is scary. And I'll be right back with Dean Spalding. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding. And we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt with the last segment of this week's Hillsdale Dialogue. Many thanks to Dean Matt Spalding for stepping in for Dr. Larry Arnn this morning and doing a live post-debate analysis. Dean Spalding, I think Donald Trump did a very good job last night of returning his time to focus on illegal immigration and the dangers it poses to America, the weakness of America, and what happened as a result of the collapse in Afghanistan. And very importantly, the weaponization of the Department of Justice and tiny Democratic prosecutors in deep blue districts against a former president. I think it made it very clear who's going to win. What did you think of those three things? The immigration, the weakness, and the weaponization.
No, I think those were his strong suits. I was actually struck by several of President Trump's answers. I thought were very good. We were all looking for how he would respond to certain things. I think he was especially strong, I thought, on foreign policy. He really turned those questions to Biden's weakness in foreign policy. Those things would have never happened under a Trump administration. They didn't under his administration. I thought that was very strong. I thought it was also very strong that he came back again and again and again to immigration, which has become a strong consensus issue across the board. And he used it to answer questions about the economy, about Social Security, about numerous things. He brought it back to that constantly. And I think on both those things, President Biden didn't have much of an answer. His answer, I thought, was kind of ironic on foreign policy. He essentially made an argument for a domino theory effect of Ukraine into Western Europe, which is not a completely unreasonable position to have. But I thought it was not a strong argument, especially given his looking back to his Vietnam War days. It was a weak argument relative to President Trump's argument. So I thought President Trump was quite strong. But I do have to say, Hugh, the one place where I thought President Trump could have been better and actually was somewhat weak, which did give President Biden an opening rhetorically, is on the one hand, President Trump, I think, very effectively came back and said several times, "You're destroying this country." At one point, he said, "The last 3.5 years, we've been living in hell." He was very strong on that. But then Biden was the one to come back and said, "No, this is a great country." I think President Trump needs to have a complete answer to that. You're destroying this country, but he needs to explain what is American greatness. Why are we a great nation, and why does he want to make it great again? It's an incomplete element of his argument, which I think if he were to make that strongly and explain why we're an exceptional country, he would actually be in a much firmer position to claim a much larger mandate and a much larger support from the American people. He's left that unanswered.
He might answer it. You're right. If a skilled rhetorician could have said, "We are a shining city on the hill, and we're going to rebuild it, and we're going to make America great again." But he didn't need to be a skilled. He was prepared for I think everyone was prepared for a much better Biden last night. I think the former president was a little bit shocked.
I completely under the circumstances and what we saw there. Look, even if Biden had met his minimal bar of performance, I think President Trump that showed up in the debate did an excellent job. He didn't allow his opponent to get under his skin. He remained calm and clear, and I think his answers had been developed on several points, and he kept coming back to the most important things. He tied his immigration rhetoric to Black and Hispanic jobs and how it's affecting other groups he's interested in developing. So I completely agree to that. I just wish there was this additional component that would have completed his argument and rounded out what I thought was a strong argument. Look at
the very good must not be the enemy of the perfect, though, Matt. Do you think? Last question, Mariah. Do you think, Dean Spalding, that he was shocked by how bad Joe Biden was? Because at one point I saw his facial expression, and he said at one point, I have no idea what he meant. And I just think, like my wife and my brother, everyone was shocked. And I think, Joe, last minute to you, I think the former president was shocked at the condition of the current president because he knows what the current president has on his desk every day, and he's afraid for the country.
Right. No, I think he was shocked. The response you mentioned about, I don't know what he just said on that one question. But the other reason I think we know that President Trump was shocked by President Biden's poor performance is precisely that he didn't go after him in the way he might have under different circumstances. He let him use his time. He didn't respond to him in the ways he might have in the past. I think that actually made President Biden's performance all the worse, because those of us that at home were watching and saw what was happening right in front of us. And it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. And I think this presidency is over.
It is, and it might be over. I think it should be over within the week. And President Harris, scary though that might be. Dean Matt Spalding of the Graduate School of Government at the Kirby Center in Washington, D.C., professor of government at Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. This concludes this week's Hillsdale Dialogue. All Hillsdale Dialogues collected at hugh4hillsdale.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.